You know what they don't tell you about retirement? They don't tell you that the moment you finally claim your piece of peace, someone will try to take it away from you. They don't warn you that your own family will be the ones holding the knife. I finally bought a quiet cabin by the lake. No city noise, no visitors, just peace. Then one call changed everything. Are you watching this from your own little corner of the world, wondering if you'll ever get to that place of peace? Well, let me tell you something. You better be ready to fight for it, because the vultures are always circling. My son-in-law called and said, "Mom, you're not safe out there alone. We're sending my uncle to stay with you." He didn't ask, he decided. Just like that. Like I was some senile old woman who couldn't tie her own shoes, let alone live in my own damn house. The audacity, the sheer, breathtaking audacity of that man still makes my blood boil. Who gave him the right? Who gave any of them the right to decide what was best for me? I'd been making decisions before he was even a thought in his father's mind, and suddenly I needed a babysitter? I said, sure. But I had my own plan for his uncle's little visit. You see, when you've lived as long as I have, when you've fought as hard as I have for every single thing you've ever wanted, you learn that sometimes the best response isn't the loudest one. Sometimes it's the quietest. Sometimes it's the one they never see coming. Before we get to what happened next, if you're watching this and you understand what it feels like to have your independence stripped away by people who claim to love you, hit that subscribe button. Tell me in the comments where you'd move if you could start over, city or countryside. Because I want to know that there are still people out there who believe in the right to choose your own damn life. Let me paint you a picture of what led to this moment, because none of this happened in a vacuum. This was years in the making, decades of being told what I should want, what I should need, what I should be grateful for. I worked nearly 40 years as a hospital administrator. 40 years. Do you know what that means? Early mornings when the sun hadn't even thought about rising. Double shifts that stretched into triple shifts because someone called in sick, and guess who had to cover? Endless noise, phones ringing, pagers beeping, people demanding answers to questions I'd answered 1,000 times before. Every single day, I walked into that sterile building with its fluorescent lights that buzzed like angry wasps and its air that smelled like disinfectant and despair. Every single day, I dealt with doctors who thought they were gods, nurses who were overworked and underpaid, and administrators above me who cared more about profit margins than patient care. But you know what kept me going? You know what got me through those hellish 40 years? A dream. A simple, beautiful dream of a small cabin on the edge of Lake Monroe, where I could finally read without interruption, paint without someone asking me to do something else, and hear the water at night instead of sirens and shouting. I saved every spare dollar for that dream. Every single dollar. Do you know what that means? While my colleagues were going out for expensive dinners, I was eating sandwiches at my desk. While they were taking vacations to Europe, I was staying home and putting that money in a savings account that grew slower than molasses in winter. I bought generic everything. I drove a car that was older than some of my coworkers. I wore the same 5 outfits to work in rotation until they were threadbare, and then I wore them some more. I didn't buy coffee from cafes. I made it at home in a pot that was old when disco was new. People thought I was cheap. People thought I was pathetic. They'd make little comments about my vintage clothing and my practical lifestyle. They didn't understand that I wasn't being cheap. I was being strategic. I wasn't being pathetic. I was being patient. Because every dollar I didn't spend on their frivolous nonsense was a dollar closer to my freedom. Every sacrifice was a step toward the life I actually wanted, not the life everyone else thought I should want. And finally, after 4 decades of grinding myself into dust for other people's comfort, I had enough. The cabin wasn't fancy. 2 rooms, a dock that needed work, a fireplace that smoked too much, but to me it was heaven. To me, it was everything I'd ever wanted wrapped up in 4 walls and a view of water that stretched beyond the horizon. The first night I spent there, I sat on that creaky dock and listened to the water lap against the posts. No phones ringing. No one knocking on my door with another crisis that couldn't wait until morning. No fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like mechanical insects. Just water. Just silence. Just peace. I cried that night. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I cried because it had taken me 70 years to find a place where I could hear my own thoughts. 70 years to find a space that was truly mine, where no one could tell me what to do or when to do it or how to do it better. For exactly 24 hours, I thought I'd made it. I thought I'd finally escaped the suffocating grip of other people's expectations and demands. I thought I'd earned the right to live my own life on my own terms. I was wrong. The day after I moved in, the call came. Not from my daughter. Oh no, she didn't have the courage to make this call herself. It came from him, her husband, the man who'd somehow convinced my sweet, gentle daughter that she needed a keeper, and that keeper needed to keep me too. Mom, he said, and isn't that rich?
Mom.
Like he had any right to call me that. Like marrying my daughter gave him some kind of ownership over me. Mom, we've been talking, and we're worried about you out there all alone. Worried. That's what he called it. Worried. It's not safe for a woman your age to be isolated like that, he continued, and I could hear the condescension dripping through the phone like poison honey. We've already made arrangements. My Uncle Harold is driving up tomorrow. He'll stay with you, help out around the place, keep you company. Did you catch that? We've already made arrangements. Not, would you like some company? Not, how would you feel about having someone stay with you? Not even, we'd like to send someone to check on you. Already made arrangements. Past tense. Decision made. Done deal. I felt something inside me break that day. Not my heart. My heart had been broken and mended so many times it was more scar tissue than organ at this point. No. What broke was my last remaining shred of faith in the people I'd spent my life caring for. Because you see, this wasn't about my safety. This wasn't about concern or love, or wanting what was best for me. This was about control. This was about a man who couldn't stand the idea that an old woman had managed to carve out a life for herself without his permission or input. Harold wanted to look after the property. That's what my son-in-law eventually admitted when I pressed him. Harold, who'd been living in his nephew's basement for the past 6 months, needed a place to stay, and my beautiful, peaceful cabin looked like the perfect solution to their problem. My sanctuary was going to become their dumping ground. My hard-earned peace was going to be sacrificed on the altar of their convenience. It felt less like protection and more like surveillance, because that's exactly what it was. Can you imagine? Can you put yourself in my shoes for just one moment and imagine how that felt? You work your entire life for one thing, one simple thing, and the moment you achieve it, someone decides you don't deserve it. Someone decides you're too old, too weak, too incompetent to enjoy the fruits of your own labor. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw the phone across the room and watch it shatter into 1,000 pieces. I wanted to drive to their house and tell them exactly what I thought of their arrangements and their concern and their complete and utter disrespect for my autonomy. But I didn't do any of those things. Instead, I took a deep breath and said something that surprised even me. I said, "Sure."
Just like that. Sure.
Like it was no big deal. Like I was happy to have my peace shattered and my independence stripped away. Like I was grateful for their interference in my life. My son-in-law was clearly expecting a fight. I could hear the confusion in his voice when he said, "Oh.
Well, good.
Harold will be there tomorrow afternoon. I'll make sure the guest room is ready," I told him, and I meant every word. I would make sure that room was ready. I would make sure Harold's stay was everything he deserved and nothing more. Because here's what they didn't understand about me, what they'd never understood about me. I didn't get to where I was by rolling over and playing dead every time someone tried to push me around. I didn't survive 40 years in hospital administration by being a pushover. I didn't manage to save enough money for my dream cabin by being weak or stupid or easily manipulated. I got where I was by being smart, by being patient, by being strategic. And if they wanted to play games with my life, well, I'd been playing games a lot longer than they had. I didn't argue. I prepared. You want to know what real power looks like? It's not screaming and shouting and making threats. Real power is quiet. Real power is methodical. Real power is knowing exactly how to make someone's life uncomfortable without them being able to prove you did it on purpose. I spent that entire day getting ready for Harold's arrival. I cleaned the guest room from top to bottom, made sure the sheets were fresh and the towels were clean. I stocked the refrigerator with food and bought extra coffee because I'm not a monster, just someone who is tired of being treated like one. But I also made some other preparations. Preparations that Harold wouldn't appreciate until it was too late to do anything about them. You see, the guest room had a window that faced the lake. Beautiful view, really. The kind of view that made you want to leave the window open all night to hear the water and feel the breeze. Unfortunately, that particular window had a little problem. The latch was broken. Had been broken since I bought the place. I'd been meaning to fix it, but somehow I just never got around to it. Funny how things like that slip your mind when you're busy preparing for unwanted houseguests. That window had a habit of sliding open in the middle of the night.
Just a few inches, mind you.
Just enough to let in the cool lake air and the sounds of the night. The sounds of water lapping against the dock. The sounds of night birds calling to each other across the water. The sounds of the neighbors' geese, who had made the lake their home and weren't particularly quiet about it. Speaking of those geese, they had developed quite an interesting habit. They liked to patrol the property at all hours, and they had a particular fondness for that broken window. Something about the reflection, maybe, or the way the light hit the glass. They would tap at it with their beaks, gentle little taps that sounded like someone knocking to get in. Tap, tap, tap. All night long sometimes. Tap, tap, tap. I'd gotten used to it, of course. After a few nights, you learn to sleep through almost anything. But someone who wasn't used to it, someone who didn't know about the geese and their nocturnal habits, well, they might find it a little disturbing. Then there was the dock. Beautiful old thing, really, but it had character. By character, I mean it creaked.
A lot.
Every time the wind picked up, every time a fish jumped, every time the water moved just right, that dock would creak and groan like an old ship in a storm. During the day, it was hardly noticeable. But at night, when everything else was quiet, those creaks echoed across the water like the moans of lost souls. Romantic, in a way, if you appreciated that sort of thing. Terrifying if you didn't. And the fireplace. Oh, that fireplace was a piece of work. It had been installed by someone who clearly didn't understand the concept of proper ventilation. Every time you lit a fire, smoke would billow out into the room before finally finding its way up the chimney. It would fill the cabin with the acrid smell of burning wood and make your eyes water until you figured out how to open the flue just right. Most people would just avoid using the fireplace altogether. But I made sure to leave plenty of kindling and newspaper right there on the hearth, just in case Harold felt like making himself a cozy fire on a cool evening. I also made sure to introduce Harold to all the neighbors. Well, the animal neighbors anyway. Like the family of raccoons who lived in the woods behind the cabin and had a habit of getting into the garbage if you didn't secure the lid just right. They were clever little things, those raccoons. They could figure out almost any latch or tie down you could imagine. And the skunks. Can't forget about the skunks. They like to come out at dusk to hunt for grubs in the yard. Beautiful creatures, really, with their black and white stripes and their fluffy tails.
Just don't startle them.
Or walk too close to their favorite feeding spots. Or make any sudden movements around them. The owls were another matter entirely. They nested in the big oak tree right outside the guest room window, and they had quite a lot to say to each other during the night. Long, drawn-out conversations that could go on for hours.
Hoo, they'd call.
Hoo. Almost like they were asking a question. Almost like they were asking who had the audacity to invade their territory. By the time Harold arrived the next afternoon, I was ready for him. I met him at his car with a smile that was warm enough to melt butter and sweet enough to give you diabetes. Harold was exactly what I'd expected. A man in his 60s who'd clearly never worked a day harder than he had to, with soft hands and a softer belly, and the kind of entitled attitude that comes from living off other people's generosity for too long. Aunt Margaret, he said, like we were old friends instead of virtual strangers. So good of you to have me. This place is beautiful. I showed him around the cabin, pointing out all the amenities. The comfortable bed in the guest room. The lovely view of the lake from his window. The charming old dock where he could sit and fish if he wanted. The rustic fireplace where he could warm himself on cool evenings. Make yourself at home, I told him, and I meant it. I wanted him to feel completely at home. I wanted him to feel so at home that he'd never want to leave. That first evening, Harold was full of energy and enthusiasm. He insisted on cooking dinner, which was fine by me. He made a decent pasta sauce. I'll give him credit for that. We sat on the small porch and watched the sun set over the lake, and he told me stories about his life and his travels and all the places he'd been. It was almost pleasant. Almost. As the evening wore on, Harold started to relax. He leaned back in his chair and sighed contentedly. "This is the life," he said. "I could get used to this. Peace and quiet, beautiful scenery, no stress. This is exactly what an old guy like me needs." I smiled and nodded and poured him another glass of wine. "I'm so glad you like it here, Harold. I hope you'll be very comfortable." Around 10 o'clock, I announced that I was turning in for the night. "I'm an early riser," I explained. "Old habits from my working days. You stay up as late as you like, though. Enjoy the evening." Harold decided he'd like to try out that fireplace, maybe read a book by the fire before bed. I helped him get it started, making sure to light it just wrong enough that it would smoke a little before settling into a proper burn. "Sometimes it takes a while to get the draw right," I explained as smoke began to fill the room. "You just have to be patient with it." I left Harold coughing slightly and waving smoke away from his face, muttering about old fireplaces and proper ventilation. I went to my own room, closed the door, and settled in to wait. I didn't have to wait long. Around midnight, I heard the first sounds of trouble. A rhythmic tapping noise, gentle but persistent. Tap, tap, tap. Tap, tap, tap. The geese had arrived for their nightly patrol. Through the thin walls of the cabin, I could hear Harold stirring in his bed. The tapping continued, and I heard him get up and move to the window. The sound of the window sliding up, then Harold's voice, muffled but audible. "Shoo! Get out of here. Stupid birds." The geese, unimpressed by Harold's authority, continued their tapping. If anything, they seemed to intensify their efforts. More geese joined the first one, and soon there was a whole chorus of tapping and honking right outside Harold's window. Harold slammed the window shut, but of course, it slid right back open again. That broken latch was a real problem. For the next 2 hours, I listened to Harold's increasingly frantic attempts to keep the window closed and the geese away. He tried propping chairs against the window. He tried tying the curtains around the frame. He tried everything except the one thing that might have actually worked, which was getting up and fixing the latch properly. But Harold wasn't the type of man who fixed things himself. Harold was the type of man who expected other people to fix things for him. Around 2 in the morning, the geese finally moved on to bother someone else, and Harold managed to get a few hours of fitful sleep. Just in time for the raccoons to discover that someone had forgotten to properly secure the garbage can lid. The crash of the metal garbage can hitting the ground was spectacular in the pre-dawn quiet. It was followed immediately by the sounds of raccoons chittering and arguing over their newfound treasure, and Harold's voice shouting from his window, "What the hell is going on out there?" I heard him stomping around his room, probably trying to see what is happening outside. The raccoons, startled by his shouting, knocked over the recycling bin for good measure before scampering back into the woods. Harold spent the next hour trying to clean up the mess in the dark, cursing under his breath the entire time. I know this because I watched him from my bedroom window, fighting back laughter as he stumbled around in his pajamas and flip-flops, trying to stuff garbage back into bags by the light of his phone. When morning finally came, Harold looked like he'd been through a war. His hair was sticking up in all directions, there were dark circles under his eyes, and he had the shell-shocked expression of a man who just realized that peace and quiet wasn't as peaceful as he'd imagined. "Rough night?" I asked innocently as I poured myself a cup of coffee. "The damn geese," Harold muttered. "And raccoons. And that window won't stay closed." "Oh yes, I've been meaning to fix that latch," I said. "It's been on my to-do list for months. I just never seem to get around to it." Harold spent the day trying to nap on the couch, but every time he started to drift off, something would wake him up. The neighbor's dog barking at a squirrel. A boat going by on the lake. The owl family starting their daily debate about territory and hunting rights. By evening, Harold was a wreck. He tried to suggest that we drive into town for dinner, maybe stay at a hotel for the night, but I reminded him that he was here to help me, not to run away every time things got a little challenging. Besides, I said, I thought you loved the peace and quiet here. You said yesterday that you could get used to this. Harold forced a smile and said of course, he was just tired from all the fresh air and nature sounds. He'd adjust. He was sure he'd adjust. That second night was even better than the first. The geese came back, of course. They'd apparently decided that Harold's window was their new favorite spot for midnight gatherings. But this time they brought friends. What started as a few gentle taps turned into a full-scale goose convention right outside Harold's room. Harold tried everything. He banged on the window. He shouted at them. He threw a shoe at the glass, which only seemed to excite them more. Finally, in desperation, he decided to go outside and chase them away personally.
This turned out to be a mistake.
Have you ever tried to chase geese away from water? They don't run. They don't hide. They turn around and chase you right back. And Harold, in his pajamas and slippers, stumbling around in the dark, was no match for a determined gaggle of lake geese defending their territory. I watched from my window as Harold ran in circles around the yard, flapping his arms and shouting, while the geese honked and hissed and generally made it clear that they didn't appreciate his attitude. Harold finally made it back to the cabin, but not before stepping in something unpleasant that the geese had left behind as a calling card. He spent the next 20 minutes trying to clean off his slipper with a garden hose, cursing the entire time. But the real masterpiece came around 3 in the morning. You see, I'd forgotten to mention one tiny detail about the cabin to Harold. The hot water heater was old, and it had a quirk. Every few hours, it would make a sound like a freight train mixed with a dying elephant as the heating element kicked on. During the day, you hardly noticed it. But at night, in the perfect silence of the lake, it sounded like the world was ending. The first time it happened, Harold shot out of bed like he'd been electrocuted. I heard him running around his room, probably trying to figure out if we were under attack or if the cabin was collapsing. "Margaret," he shouted. "Margaret, what was that?" I took my time getting to his door, shuffling along like the elderly woman I was supposed to be. "What was what, dear?" "That noise. That horrible noise. It sounded like something exploded." "Oh," I said, as if I'd just remembered. "That's just the water heater. Old thing, but it works fine. You'll get used to it." Harold stared at me like I'd just told him the cabin was haunted by the ghost of a screaming banshee. "It does that all night?" "Every few hours," I confirmed. "Usually around 3, 6, and 9. Sometimes more if someone's been using a lot of hot water." "That noise. That horrible noise. It sounded like something exploded." "Oh," I said, as if I'd just remembered. "That's just the water heater. Old thing, but it works fine. You'll get used to it." Harold stared at me like I'd just told him the cabin was haunted by the ghost of a screaming banshee. "It does that all night?" "Every few hours," I confirmed. "Usually around 3, 6, and 9. Sometimes more if someone's been using a lot of hot water." I saw the exact moment when Harold realized what this meant. His face went pale, and he looked at me with the expression of a man who'd just been sentenced to eternal damnation. "Every few hours," he repeated weakly. "Don't worry," I said cheerfully. "You'll sleep right through it after a few nights. I hardly notice it anymore." I left Harold standing in his doorway, staring after me with the look of a man who was beginning to understand that he might have made a terrible mistake. The water heater performed beautifully that night. Right on schedule at 6 a.m., it let out another earth-shaking roar that probably woke up half the county. I heard Harold's muffled scream through the wall, followed by what sounded like him falling out of bed. By the time I got up at my usual 7 o'clock, Harold was already in the kitchen, looking like a zombie. His hair was sticking up at impossible angles, his eyes were bloodshot, and he was clutching a cup of coffee like it was the only thing keeping him tethered to reality. "Good morning," I said brightly. How did you sleep?" Harold just stared at me. I don't think he had the energy left to form words. "I thought we might go for a walk around the lake this morning," I continued. "Get some fresh air. Maybe visit the neighbors' horses. They love visitors." I should probably mention that the neighbors' horses were actually quite friendly, but they had one little quirk. They were terrified of men wearing baseball caps. Something about the brim, maybe, or the way it changed the silhouette of a human head. Harold, of course, never went anywhere without his lucky Red Sox cap. The horses took one look at Harold and his cap and immediately started snorting and stamping and backing away. The neighbor came running out, apologizing profusely, explaining that they'd never seen the horses react that way to anyone before. Maybe it's the hat, she suggested. They can be funny about certain things. Harold reluctantly removed his cap, and the horses calmed down immediately. But the damage was done. Harold spent the rest of our walk looking nervously over his shoulder, jumping every time one of the horses whinnied or moved too quickly. On the way back to the cabin, we encountered the skunk family out for their evening hunt. I timed our walk perfectly, knowing exactly when they'd be crossing the path to get to their favorite grub hunting spot. Just walk slowly and quietly, I whispered to Harold as we approached the black and white forms. They're more afraid of us than we are of them. This was true, technically. But Harold didn't walk slowly and quietly. Harold saw the skunks and immediately started backing away, making little panic noises and waving his arms. The skunks, startled by his sudden movement and strange behavior, did what skunks do best. Harold got the full treatment. Both barrels, as they say. The smell was so intense that my eyes started watering from 20 feet away. We spent the rest of the evening trying to get the skunk smell off Harold using every home remedy I could think of. Tomato juice, baking soda, vinegar, hydrogen peroxide. Nothing worked completely. Harold still smelled faintly of skunk when he finally crawled into bed that night, defeated and demoralized. By the third day, Harold was begging to go back to the city. He looked like a man who'd been through a natural disaster. His clothes were wrinkled and stained. His hair hadn't been properly combed in days. He had scratches on his arms from the rose bushes he'd run into while fleeing the geese, and he still carried the faint but unmistakable aroma of skunk. But the final straw came that third night. I'd saved the best for last. You see, there was one more feature of the cabin that I hadn't mentioned to Harold. The plumbing was a little temperamental, especially the pipes that ran behind the guest room wall. When the temperature dropped at night, those pipes would contract and make the most interesting sounds. Clink, clink, clink. It sounded exactly like someone walking around inside the walls, dragging chains behind them. Like the ghost of Jacob Marley had taken up residence in my cabin and decided to spend his afterlife practicing his haunting techniques. The first few clinks woke Harold up, and I heard him moving around his room, probably trying to figure out where the noise was coming from. Then there was silence for a few minutes, and I could picture him lying in bed, listening intently. Clink, clink, clink. This time, Harold shot out of bed like he'd been launched from a cannon. I heard him stumbling around in the dark, bumping into furniture, probably searching for the source of the mysterious sounds. Margaret, he called out, his voice higher than usual. Margaret, there's someone in the walls. I took my time responding, shuffling to his door in my bathrobe and slippers. What's wrong, Harold? There's someone in the walls, he repeated, pointing frantically at the wall behind his bed. Listen. We stood there in silence for a moment. Right on cue, the pipes let out another series of clinks. Clink, clink, clink. Harold jumped about a foot in the air. There. Did you hear that? Oh, that, I said dismissively. That's just the pipes. They do that when it gets cold at night. Old plumbing, you know. Nothing to worry about. Harold stared at me like I'd just told him that the serial killer living in his walls was perfectly harmless. Just the pipes. Just the pipes, I confirmed. You'll get used to it. I hardly notice it anymore. Harold spent the rest of the night sitting in the living room with all the lights on, jumping every time the pipes made a sound. By morning, he looked like he'd aged 10 years in 3 days. Margaret, he said, when I found him still sitting in the living room, clutching an empty coffee cup. I think I need to go back to the city. Oh, I said, as if this was completely unexpected. But you just got here. I thought you were enjoying the peace and quiet. The peace and quiet is trying to kill me, Harold said weakly. The geese, the raccoons, the skunks, the pipes, the water heater. I haven't slept more than 2 hours at a time since I got here. I said thoughtfully. Maybe you're just not used to country living. It can take some adjustment. I don't think I'm cut out for adjustment, Harold replied. I think I'm cut out for hotels and room service and pipes that don't sound like they're haunted. Well, if you're sure, I said. I certainly don't want you to be uncomfortable. Harold was packed and in his car within an hour. As he loaded his suitcase into the trunk, he kept glancing nervously at the woods, probably watching for geese or skunks or any other creatures that might want to give him a farewell present. Thank you for having me, he said, though his tone suggested he wasn't particularly grateful. It's a beautiful place. Really. I'm just not really a nature person. No harm in that, I replied graciously. Not everyone is meant for this kind of life. Harold drove away like his tail was on fire, and I watched his car disappear around the bend with a sense of satisfaction that was better than Christmas morning. When my son-in-law called to complain, I simply said, maybe peace and quiet aren't for everyone. What did you do to him? He demanded. Harold called me from a hotel in the city, babbling about geese and ghosts and skunks. He says he never wants to see another lake as long as he lives. I didn't do anything, I said, which was technically true. I hadn't done anything. I'd simply allowed Harold to experience the natural consequences of inviting himself into my life without permission. All I did was welcome him into my home and share the authentic lake experience with him. I continued. If Harold found that challenging, well, perhaps he should have considered that before deciding I needed a caretaker. My son-in-law spluttered and fumed and threatened to come up and check on me personally. I told him he was welcome anytime, but that I should probably warn him about the poison ivy that had been growing around the driveway lately. Funny how quickly he decided that maybe I was fine on my own after all. After Harold left, I sat by the lake listening to the water. For the first time since I'd arrived, the silence didn't feel like it was being borrowed or conditional. It felt earned. The geese came by that evening, but this time their tapping on the window sounded friendly, like old friends checking in to make sure I was okay. The raccoons knocked over the garbage can again, but I just smiled and made a mental note to get a better lid. The pipes clanked their familiar song, and the water heater roared its ancient greeting, and all of it sounded like home. I realized something that night, sitting on my creaky dock with a cup of tea, and the stars reflected in the water. For 70 years, I'd been compromising. For 70 years, I'd been making myself smaller and quieter and more convenient for other people's comfort. I'd worked jobs I hated to support a family that took my sacrifice for granted. I'd smiled when I wanted to scream, agreed when I wanted to argue, accommodated when I wanted to demand. I'd spent my entire life being reasonable and responsible and grateful for whatever scraps of respect people were willing to throw my way. But those days were over. This cabin, this lake, this peace, I'd earned every square inch of it. I'd paid for it with decades of my life, with my health, with my dreams deferred and my needs ignored. And I'd be damned if I was going to let anyone take it away from me just because they thought I was too old to know what was best for myself. Sometimes, protecting your peace means teaching people to leave it alone. And sometimes, the best lessons are the ones that stick. Harold never came back, of course. My son-in-law stopped making suggestions about what I needed and who I should have around. My daughter called more often, but she asked instead of assumed, requested instead of demanded. The cabin settled into its rhythms, and I settled into mine. I read books by the fire that finally drew properly after I fixed the flu. I painted watercolors of a lake at different times of day. I learned the names of all the birds and became friends with the geese, who turn out to be quite personable once you got to know them. The raccoons, and I reached an understanding about the garbage cans. The skunks learned to recognize me and would nod politely when we passed each other on evening walks. Even the pipes seemed to clank more melodically, like they were playing a song just for me. I lived alone, but I was never lonely. The lake was full of life, and the woods were full of stories, and every morning brought something new to discover or appreciate or simply enjoy in silence. People would ask me if I ever got scared, living out there by myself. What if something happened? What if I got sick? What if I needed help? What if? I would smile and tell them that I'd spent my whole life being afraid of what if. What if I wasn't smart enough, strong enough, good enough? What if I failed?
What if people didn't like me?
What if I couldn't take care of everyone else's needs before my own? Now I was more interested in what is. What is the sound of water at dawn? What is the feeling of complete solitude? What is the weight of a decision that affects no one but yourself? What is peace, real peace, when you finally stop letting other people define it for you? I'll tell you what it is. It's the sound of your own breathing in a quiet room. It's the ability to choose your own schedule, your own meals, your own company, or lack thereof. It's the freedom to be difficult when someone tries to make you convenient, to be unreasonable when someone expects you to be accommodating. It's the right to say no without explanation, to set boundaries without apology, to live your own life without asking permission from people who never had to sacrifice what you sacrificed to get there. They wanted to control me, my son-in-law and his uncle, and all the people who thought they knew better than I did what my life should look like. They wanted to put me in a box labeled elderly woman and treat me like a problem to be solved rather than a person with agency and intelligence and the right to make my own choices. Instead, I taught them what peace really costs. It costs the willingness to be misunderstood. It costs the courage to disappoint people who expect you to put their comfort before your own autonomy. It costs the strength to stand alone when everyone else thinks you should be grateful for company you never asked for. But it's worth every penny of that price, because the alternative is spending whatever time you have left living someone else's version of your life. And I'd already spent too many years doing that. Now, when I sit on my dock in the evening and watch the sun set over the lake, I don't think about what I should be doing or who I should be calling or what other people expect from me. I think about tomorrow's painting, or the book I'm reading, or whether the geese will bring their babies by for a visit this spring. I think about how quiet it is and how that quiet belongs entirely to me. Sometimes people drive by slowly, looking at the little cabin by the lake, probably wondering who lives there and whether they're lonely. If they could see me through the windows, they'd see an old woman puttering around her kitchen, or reading in her chair by the fire, or standing on her dock with a cup of coffee, watching the water. They might think I look lonely. They might think I need rescuing. They'd be wrong. I look content. I look free. I look like someone who finally figured out the difference between being alone and being lonely, between needing people and letting people run your life. I look like someone who learned to protect her peace, no matter what it cost or who it disappointed. And if you're watching this, if you're listening to my story and recognizing something in it that resonates with your own life, let me tell you something. You have the right to your peace too. You have the right to make choices that other people don't understand. You have the right to prioritize your own well-being over other people's expectations. It's not selfish. It's not ungrateful. It's not mean. It's survival. Because if you don't protect your peace, no one else will. If you don't stand up for your right to live your own life, other people will gladly live it for you, making decisions that serve their needs and their comfort rather than yours. And you'll wake up one day, maybe when you're 70 years old like I was, and realize that you've spent your entire life being the person other people needed you to be instead of the person you actually are. Don't let that happen. Don't wait until you're my age to start setting boundaries and demanding respect and refusing to accommodate people who see your kindness as weakness. Start now.
Start today.
Start with the next person who tries to tell you what you need or what you should want or what would be best for you. Tell them what I told my son-in-law. Maybe your version of what's best for me isn't actually what's best for me. Tell them what I showed Harold, that peace isn't passive and quiet doesn't mean pushover, and sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply refuse to make someone else's problem your emergency. Tell them what I learned sitting by my lake. That being alone isn't the worst thing that can happen to you. Being surrounded by people who don't respect your autonomy is much worse. The lake is still here, and so am I. The geese still visit, and the raccoons still cause trouble, and the pipes still clink their midnight song. But it's all mine now. Every sound and silence, every frustration and joy. I earned this peace. I fought for this freedom. I paid for this solitude with decades of service to other people's needs and wants and demands. And I'll be damned if I'm going to give it up just because someone else thinks they know better than I do what my life should look like. They can keep their concern and their arrangements and their Uncle Harold. I'll keep my lake, my cabin, my creaky dock, and my hard-won right to tell them all exactly where they can put their good intentions. Because sometimes teaching people to leave your peace alone is the most peaceful thing you can do. And sometimes the best revenge is living well, living freely, and living exactly the way you choose to live, regardless of what anyone else thinks about it. That's what real power looks like.
That's what freedom sounds like.
That's what peace costs, and why it's worth every sacrifice you make to get it. If you can't do it for yourself, do it for me. Do it for every person who spent their life accommodating other people's comfort at the expense of their own happiness. Do it because someone needs to prove that it's possible to win, even when the odds are stacked against you and everyone thinks you're too old, too weak, too naive to know what's good for you. Do it because the alternative is living the rest of your life as a supporting character in someone else's story, and you deserve to be the hero of your own. The water is still lapping against my dock. The sun is still setting over my lake. The peace is still mine, hard-earned and well-defended. And tomorrow, when I wake up to the sound of birds instead of alarm clocks, when I choose my own schedule instead of having it chosen for me, when I drink my coffee in silence instead of having to make conversation with people who think they're doing me a favor by existing in my space, tomorrow I'll remember why every sleepless night Harold spent here is worth it. Because freedom isn't free, and peace isn't passive, and sometimes the most powerful thing an old woman can do is simply refuse to be grateful for treatment she never asked for and never deserved. They wanted to control me. Instead, I taught them what it really costs to mess with someone who has nothing left to lose and everything to protect. And that, my friends, is a lesson worth learning.